guys, welcome. Happy Tuesday. I'm so excited for this live that I'm hosting today for myself and for Caitlin, and I will tell you all more about her. I'm just waiting for a few of you to log in and start this conversation. I see Caitlin is just hopping in. So this conversation, to me is very important because as moms, as parents, sometimes we struggle in understanding what our children need, what they need for them to thrive. And we are so invested in raising successful children. And in that desire that we have in raising successful children, we take the fun out of learning and really understanding what it is that each of our children individually need in order for them to thrive. But more importantly, this journey becomes even harder for some parents who have neurodivergence in their family. And with Caitlin being an expert in this subject of bringing joy back to learning and knowing more about neurodivergence, I wanted to bring her on, and I am just gonna let her in right now. And by the way, so whatever happens, you can go back and watch and share with any mom, parent, dad that you want to share with. Thank you, Caitlin, for being here. I'm so excited to, make our calendars align so that we can open up this conversation that I know many parents are going to find so much, golden nuggets in it.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
And I'm so happy that I keep saying, we connected over me listening a podcast episode that you did with Nicole. I've been sharing that podcast episode. I'm very selective in the episodes that I choose, and something about that conversation really sparked me. And as I was driving, I was like, yeah, absolutely. I agree. So after that, I'm like, I need to connect with her. I want to see, if we are aligned, if you're up for having a conversation. So thank you for your time. I know many of the moms that I have here and I work privately with are going to find so much value in what you have to share with us today.
No, it's my pleasure. And also, I think it's such a great story of a testament to just reaching out to somebody. You heard something I said, it resonated for you, you reached out, and here we are, right? Mm-hmm. So I think sometimes people hesitate to do that, but I welcome it.
Yeah, no, thank you. So why don't we start the conversation with kind of telling us who you are. I know you're an educator, you're a speaker, you have your own consulting agency, your tutoring agency, so many things, all the things and the check boxes. But really, what is Joyfully Learning and what is your mission? What are you trying to achieve here with your skills and also the message that you're, propagating and putting out there?
Sure. Kids learn best when they're having fun. And when we say it, it seems so obvious. We go well, of course. And yet it's not what's happening in all of our kids' learning spaces, right? Their schools and other communities in which they're learning, right? So the other thing that I think is important to really think about is kids come to us innately curious, right? When you think about your toddler, your preschooler asking you, why, 1,000 times why, right? And I always make the joke, my older son, he would ask why 100 times. And then at the end, he'd go, but what would happen if we didn't? Right? They come to us wired for that. And there are ways that we can preserve that curiosity. And there are also ways that we can inadvertently shut it down, right? And part of preserving it is preserving this joy. Learning for little kids is joyful. And there's no reason that it can't be that way as they get older. And the other thing here is that the more joyful the learning is for our kids, the more engaged they are with it, the more we preserve our own sanity as moms, right? Because you've heard me say oh, wait, I'm a person too. We're people too. That's an important part of this conversation.
No, absolutely. It's kind of that's why I think that episode and your message, obviously after digging a little bit more about who you are and what you do, really connected with me. Because for those of you who are joining us from Caitlin's account, I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm down here in Florida, sunny Florida. But majority of my work has been around helping children who have had or are in the process of getting a diagnosis. And majority of my work that I did, I want to say in my first 6-7 years as a therapist and even as an assessor, was to really help the parent was in the school, inside the schools, right? Being a licensed therapist in the school and connecting the parent, the child with the resources that the school could provide so that that child could thrive. And part of my job was to provide some of the emotional, life skills, social skills to the child and also to the parent, because it can feel really, scary, overwhelming, and even sometimes just emotionally, just like a lot, right, as a parent to navigate the diagnosis path, to even think, what do you mean, like, my child has a diagnosis, right? To even understand in the school system all of the options, the 504, the IEP, private school, charter school, like there's just so much, right? And so part of the question that I wanted to ask you is, do you also see that some parents, I'm never going to say all, but that some parents struggle in the path of getting that diagnosis, of even thinking if there could potentially be a diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no universal, everybody responds to something one way, right? So many parents I talk to do struggle understanding, when a diagnosis or a form of neurodivergence is identified in their family or with their child. And then I work with families where the parents themselves have a form of neurodivergence. And so that's completely comfortable to them, right? They know what it's all about. I think that the key here is the more that we know, the more as moms, the more we feel empowered, the more we feel we can trust our own instincts, because nobody knows your child better than you do. But unfortunately, we live in a system where a lot of times our instincts as moms are devalued, right? And so the metaphor I gave, I said, like, when I became a first-time mom, and my oldest is 9, so we're going back 9 years, I felt like a tiny boat in a big ocean, right? And the pediatrician would say one thing and I'd get splashed over here, and my mother-in-law would say something and I got splashed over here, right? And I just felt that sort of lack of stability and trust in my own instincts. And over time, I came to realize that every time I trusted my instincts, my son, and now my children, I have 2, thrive, right? And so that became this gift that I could give to other parents, right? Mm-hmm. Helping them figure out how their children learn best, how to advocate for their children in their school or other learning settings, right? And how to trust those instincts and feel confident and sturdy and capable in those conversations, both with your child, with your family members, with teachers, with tutors, in all of those venues. Because, and you probably see this in your practice too, how often do I have a conversation with a mom who maybe she's like a CEO of a company, she feels confident in her home, and yet she goes into her first grade parent teacher conference for her child like she is the 6-year-old, right? And the system is set up to set us up for that, right? Because you walk in the door and the first thing they do is have you sit in that little itty bitty chair, right? And most of us have gone through decades of our own schooling where we've been conditioned to see teachers and school leadership as experts and authority figures. Mm-hmm. So we go into these conversations in that mindset of, like, I'm the 6-year-old. So a lot of my work is to help empower moms really to listen to those instincts and say, you know what, I'm an equal partner on this team. And as a team, our goal is helping my child thrive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I can absolutely agree. And when you said that, I had, the perfect example of just last year, my daughter started kinder, right? And I walked in with we were all starting on this journey, and it was scary, and I had all of my own emotions, as to what it was like to have her in this big girl school and all those things. But, one of the first things that they make you do in charter schools is to not donate your time, volunteer. That was the word I was looking for, to volunteer, right? And so I wanted to volunteer. I went in with another mom friend, and we were set to be there at like 8 a.m. I couldn't wake up on time, whatever. And she's like, are you going to pick me up? Are you going to pick me up? We have to gather on time. And I'm like, we can be 10 minutes late. It's fine. No. I don't want to make a bad impression. This is a really terrible first bad impression, and that can have repercussions for my twins and my daughters. And, I'll meet you there. I'm like, okay. We ended up getting there at the same time, and eventually on that same day she told me, I really struggled in school. I was meant to be felt as I was inferior and not smart enough, and I struggled academically. And she was bringing all of that, I have to be on time, because if I'm not on time, then that has repercussions for my daughter. Obviously, I didn't feel that, you know, and I worked so hardly on breaking those limiting beliefs and those limiting barriers to feel like if I'm 10 minutes late, the world will not end. Right?
Yeah.
But that 6-year-old girl came alive that day, and was such a hard struggle. And so to that point, we are talking here about helping our kids thrive. But what is thrive? And I know we didn't have this question to you, because at the same time, and I opened the conversation with, we want to raise successful children. But nowadays, like, what the heck is successful? What the heck is thriving?
So I'm
You know,
so
it
glad
can
that
mean
you asked
totally
that.
different things. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked that. So it's really good for me to establish, especially if we're chatting with some folks who are your followers and may not know me yet, what I define as success. And this is for my own children, right? Like, I'm a mom. I'm living this with you guys. I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. For me, success for my children is that they have choices. They can have the career they want. They can get married or have kids if they want to, or not if they don't want to. They can live where they want, right? That is how I define success for my children, having choices. Now, how do we define our kids thriving? That very much is a question of stepping back and thinking about, what does my family value? When our child is younger, especially, our family values become the most powerful values. And as my child gets older, what does he value? I have 2 boys. What does he value in himself, right? Like, what are those characteristics? What are his values? So whether or not my child is thriving depends a great deal on whether the experiences that he's having are aligning with our family's values and what he values in himself and what he values in his community. And it's really interesting that you brought up this thing about being 10 minutes late, right? Because lateness, attendance, right? Topics like this come up a lot when we talk to parents with neurodivergent kids, because there is a certain amount of ableism involved in rewarding perfect attendance. Because if a child has a chronic illness, let's say, or a parent has a chronic illness, or any number of other issues that may be going on at home, we're now rewarding or penalizing the children, A, for something that may be completely out of their control, and B, many schools start doing that at a very young age, like a kindergartner who's completely dependent on caregivers to even get there, right? So I think it's really important that when we look at what happens in our school systems and our education systems, that we remember that it's all subjective, right? Some person or some group of people decided this is what's right, yeah? And not as much of it is evidence-based as you would like to think, right? We send our kids to school, and I don't want to just talk about schoolishness, because I work with a lot of homeschool families too, and we can talk more about that also. Absolutely. But when we are talking about kids who go to brick and mortar schools, right? We send our kids to school often with an assumption that the decisions being made there are founded in research, right? That they are evidence-based, when the reality is that a lot of them aren't. Right? And not that that's intentionally harmful. It's just educators making the best decisions they can in the moment, but not necessarily founded in research, right? So this idea that you brought up about rewarding attendance and punctuality, where is the research on that? Where is the research that shows that that's what helps my child or your child thrive, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I understand what you're saying. And oh my God, I have stories on that, because of course, like my daughter goes to a brick and mortar, it's a charter school, like all of the things. My husband is very much about timeliness. And I remember, like, it was all about being on time, being on time, being on time. And I'm like, it's okay if she makes it like 10 minutes late. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. And to the point where, like, it got to be like so stressful in the morning. And I had to say, like, wait, let's backtrack. Is this how you want to feel every morning? Is this how you want your daughter to feel every morning? We're saying bye for like 7 hours. I want for it to be like, yes, it's important to be on time, but it's not all or nothing. Funny story, you know, in the report card, every quarter that we get it, it marks like the attendance, the tardies, the absences. Like, she literally had nothing. And at the last quarter, there was one day where my husband woke up late and they were like 5 minutes late or something, right? According to the school schedule, still a very early day at 8 in the morning. And it was there, like that one tardy. And he's like, I almost did it. And I'm like, it's not even your report card. It's your daughter's report card. He's like, that one day, like, messed it up. it was just so funny, which goes into like the limiting thoughts and the expectations that we hold as parents. I agree with your definition of thriving. I personally also would add, and I think you would too, you know, that for me, a successful child is a child who then becomes a social, emotional, intelligent adult. Because that to me means that that adult will be able to connect with his own emotions, connect with the emotions of another human being, have successful social relationships, you know, at work, in marriage, with friends, with himself, with themselves. And just, I don't know, like I hear so much in my practice that the success is the straight A's, the being in all of the extracurricular activities, the, you know, my child cannot be bored. I need to prepare my child for college. It's like all of these like checklists, but like what's inside that child emotionally, you know?
So I think, again, this goes to the idea of parents feeling a lot of pressure from voices all around them. And sometimes we can get caught up in this whirlwind of like, oh, well, this family has their child enrolled in soccer and lacrosse and ceramics, and this family has their child doing Mandarin lessons. And, you know, if he doesn't get straight A's, where will he go to college? And if he doesn't go to college, and we get like, we spin, right? And I think that the best thing that we can do for our kids is look at what causes them to light up inside and help foster their interests and provide more of what they're showing they're interested in. So in education jargon, we would call this self-direction, right? So my child shows that he's really interested in physics, and I want to make that more available to him. So we can go to the library, we can find books, we can talk to friends who work in physics, we can find a tutor in physics, right? The pushback I often get on that is, well, but how do I know? Like, what if we're missing out on something, right? How do I know he could be tomorrow's like virtuoso soccer player and I'll just never know because I didn't put him in soccer, right? So the idea is that we expose our kids to opportunities, right? We bring things into our homes, we put different things in the environment, we take them out to experience different things, and then we see what they're drawn to, right? So it's not that we're not giving them opportunity or we're not exposing them to things, but there's a big difference between that framing versus like a parent saying prescriptively to their child, this semester you're taking lacrosse, next semester you're taking badminton, the semester after that you're, right? It's not lack of opportunity or lack of direction or lack of drive. It's about the framing around allowing your child to direct some of what they want and what interests them, because the more interested they're in something, the more engaged they're going to be with learning about it. And everything's connected.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'll give you an example from my own life. So my kids discovered an interest in model rocketry, right? And they were super into that. So I was like, okay, how can I facilitate that self-direction that they're showing me? They're directing their own interests, right? Well, you know what? As we get involved in model rocketry clubs and building the rockets and looking at it, that's physics. We're learning physics. That's chemistry. We're learning chemistry. That's visual arts because we're decorating them, right? That's community building because we're meeting other kids and families who are interested in this. So, you know, nothing happens in isolation if we train ourselves essentially as parents to see that learning is everywhere, right?
I agree. No, I agree. Like even in baking, even in cooking, even in art, and just prescribe, like allowing the everyday moments to be the moments where your child is directly or indirectly telling you what they're into, you know? And you will be surprised. Like, yeah, my son, he's 4, like he's very much into soccer. Even the soccer coach says like, you know, you got something here, like keep exploring it. But I also learned that he's very much into art and the way that he draws. And then last week, I don't even have a piano at home, but we went to a friend's house that has a piano and he was there like playing. And my stepdad, who's into music, I sent him the video and he's like, yeah, like keep exploring that. And I'm like, it never even occurred to me because I'm not into music. I'm not even an artist. And I tell my husband, like, we're not artists. Like, how did we get this? You know, maybe we never explored it. So it's just that. It's just listening to your intuition, because like you mentioned, you're going to have the boat that gives you all of the splashes, but also being willing to see the child who is in front of you. And I know you're very much into like strength-based learning. And I wanted to kind of like start tapping into that, right? Because we were talking about how to best advocate for children, not only in school, but also as like members of society. But what would even be the first step in advocating for our children?
Okay, so let's back up and just talk a little bit about what strengths-based learning is, because not everybody's familiar with that term. So basically what strengths-based learning is, it means that we identify our children's strengths and we show them how they can use those strengths to grow in the areas where they need to or they want to grow. So here's one way of looking at it. If I say to you, right, here are all the ways you're failing to meet my expectations and I have to help you catch up. Or if I say to you, here are these ways you're really strong and I'm going to teach you how to use those strengths to grow in this other area. Which of those is going to get you more engaged in learning, right?
Yeah. No,
that's the simplest. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, the one where I feel like I have an option, really, like where I have choices. And I don't know, like, do you have examples, since I know you advocate and do consulting and help parents like in school, like is there a way to tangibly like give an example to a parent? For example, would strength-based be also schools that now allow kids who, let's say, have a 504 and IEP to sit on a ball or be standing up instead of all be, you know, sitting in a chair in a very specific, like what does that look like in the educational system?
Yeah, so what you're describing there is about creating a neurodiversity affirming environment, and I would love to talk about what that means also, because that can sound a little jargony. But first, let me answer the other part of your question is, what does a strengths-based approach look like in action, right? So that could look a lot of different ways. I'll give you a couple of examples. You mentioned your son, I think, is really into soccer and really strong in soccer, and you didn't say, but I got the impression that he really enjoys it, right? Let's say that he's really strong at soccer and he really enjoys soccer and he's not feeling so great about math these days. There is so much math in soccer, right? We could sit down and we could talk about the geometry of the angles, the direction you hit the kick the ball is going to impact where it goes to the goal, the rosters of the teams, how to, in professional soccer, how do they decide who gets traded, what are the stats? That's all math.
True.
Right? So we can use this thing that he loves, his strength, to help him connect to an area where we might want him to grow, right? That's one example. Another example on a smaller scale, let's talk about writing, right? A lot of us have kids who love to write, and a lot of us have kids who struggle as writers. And when I have a child in front of me who thinks that they are a bad writer, right? Our strengths-based approach looks something like, you know, when we speak in English about writing, we have one word to write, but we really mean two very different things. We mean the process of composing our writing in our heads, and we mean the physical act of writing it or keyboarding it on the page. Those are two very different things. But because we have one word for them, often in our school settings, they're treated like they're the same. So a child who struggles to physically write or type on the page internalizes, I'm a bad writer, when they may actually compose their writing beautifully. Well, ask me what's more important, right? Because we have technology that can take your dictation. We have powerful people who have executive assistants who take down their notes and take their dictation. We have ghostwriters, right? Like there are a lot of ways those words can get down on the page, or you could narrate it as an audiobook, which would make it more accessible to a wider community anyway, going back to talking about neurodivergence in a second. So I uncouple those things for the kids, right? Right? Those two processes of writing, composing and physical, separate. Right? And if you need to grow with one, it doesn't mean you're not beautiful with the other, right? Or strong with the other. So here I have this child who thinks I'm a bad writer. I say, you know what? We're not writing anything on the page. You tell me, you know, whatever this prompt is, whatever the assignment is, let's just talk about it. You tell me. And they start to tell me this writing, speak this writing, and I'm going to latch on to the first thing I hear that I can comment as a strength, right? So maybe the child says to me, the water was so cold, it felt like someone dragged an icicle down my arm. I'm going to go, wait a second. That was beautiful. Do you hear what you just wrote? Even if they spoke it, because this is part of the writing process, right?
They came up with the sentence in their head.
Do you hear what you just wrote? That descriptive language, I can feel that in my body. You are such a strong writer. Now, let me tell you how we can use that and work on this other skill where you want to grow more, right? That's how strengths-based gets applied.
No, and when you were saying that, I was thinking also of the importance when we go back to success and thriving and what it actually means, especially in the neurodivergent world, like self-esteem. Like you could have all of these skills, but without the self-esteem, the belief that so many children who then become adults who don't believe in themselves because all they heard is like, there's one way of writing, there's one way of learning, there's one way of, you know, of getting A's, and there's one way to be successful. And I think what you're doing is telling parents and children, there's more ways. ways. There's multiple ways. There's, you know, and using your strengths. And on that, like, you're doing such a beautiful thing because you're also building their self-esteem, which is everything.
So, you know, this time of year, this is a perfect segue into this time of year, we see a lot of headlines. Learning loss, summer slide, you know, all
I heard like this, that the summer slide. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like this fear-mongering clickbait for moms, right? Of like, oh no, is my child going to forget everything she learned over the summer? You know, all of this stuff. Is there some research to support that there is some reduction from the end of the school year to the next school year if you don't practice skills in certain areas? Yes. And, you know, that's something, if anybody wants to reach out to me, we can talk about more. Wonderful. But my focus is not like, I don't want you guys in your heads of like, oh no, learning loss, summer slide, like fear, 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 right? What I want us to frame this as is we all as moms, we want our children going into next school year, whether that's a brick and mortar school or homeschool, whatever it is, we want our children going into next school year from a position of the greatest confidence possible. We want them entering that learning environment feeling confident and capable, right? And so everything we do over the summer, since here we are sitting in the middle of summer, it's hot here, I don't know if you could tell, right? Everything we're doing should be in service of that. I want my child to feel confident and capable going into the next learning environment, right? Whatever that looks like for your child, there are a lot of pieces that go into that. It's not just skill mastery, content mastery, although that is part of it, right? Maybe you can speak to that because I think that's really what you help moms do too. How do we as moms feel confident and capable, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think, you know, what I do in that sense is if I'm learning or just starting, not learning, sorry, if I'm just starting to help a parent learn like what this whole thing means of, you know, welcome to the neurodivergent world. It's not the end of the world. Let's just learn. We learn all in a different way. Like, let's be open to this. The first step is offering a safe space to bring up whatever emotions they need to process, to grieve what they thought motherhood and parenting would look like, and to then come to terms with, you know, this experience of really connecting with their children for who they are. This is not about strengths and weaknesses. This is about, like, this is who your child is, you know, and you didn't fail as a parent. This is not upon you because they feel like all of the guilt that this is kind of like their fault somehow. No, you know, so it's kind of like giving them a space where they can process whatever emotions and whatever dreams and whatever limiting beliefs that they, you know, that they had set not only for themselves and their parenting, but for their children. And I think when they come to terms with that, you know, that it's not an all or nothing thing, it doesn't mean that your child will not thrive. Then they can start formulating a path of like, okay, I need to get the tutoring. I need to maybe change schools. I need to, you know, look into strength-based learning. And then we can set a path of like, okay, are we going to use calendars? Are we going to use agendas? Like, what are we going to use in terms of like learning and succeeding in school? Obviously, that's not my area. I'm not a tutor. So I refer them to a local space. Now if you do virtual, I just help them with the emotional piece of acceptance and like, you got this. Let's just set the path, right? And I also, if possible, if time allows, because sometimes I'm like so busy as well to help their children, but we hold family meetings, we hold individual meetings where I also help the child develop the social emotional skills and most importantly, the self-esteem, right? Because some parents even have to backtrack and say, okay, so you just got a diagnosis of, let's say, ADHD. Do you even know what that means? How can you also understand your child and how their brain works, right? And it's just opening up that conversation of being okay with who your child is.
Well, this is part of why I'm so mission driven in the work that I do, right? Because everything that you're describing is a result of not having enough neurodiversity affirming community around you, right? That fear or that struggle. The more that we build neurodiversity affirming spaces, the more that people understand that no two people think or process information the same way. And that's actually hugely beneficial to our species. So maybe this is actually a great moment to go back to the question of like, what is neurodiversity and what does it mean to be neurodiversity affirming, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, neurodiversity is a fact of our species. It is not a diagnosis. There are forms of neurodiversity that come with diagnoses that most of us are really familiar with at this point. You mentioned ADHD, and there are obviously a whole slew of them, but neurodiversity itself is just a fact of our species, right? No two people think the same way or process information the same way. And it's actually necessary for our species to thrive. Just like we need biodiversity in our ecosystems, we need neurodiversity in our population. So here's one way I think about it. If you want something different one day, like a cure for cancer or a solution to climate change, why would you think that forcing everybody to conform to thinking the same way would ever get you something different as a result? Right? It just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that's the foundation here. Like, what is neurodiversity? Now, forms of neurodivergence come with diagnoses, as we talked about. Like, let's talk about ADHD since you brought that one up, right? Well, a lot of these forms of neurodivergence have the words deficits and disorders built right into their names, right?
Which are horrible.
Right.
I think like that needs to change. I just the word disorder, like who wants that for themselves and much less for their children? Deficit. Right. It's like, yeah.
So again, this brings us back to what I was saying before about remembering that this is all subjective, right? Some person or group of people decided to call this thing attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and chose those words. If that does not align with your family values or what your child values about themselves, you don't have to agree that that's a deficit and a disorder. Now, there's a lot of nuance around this. Is probably too much for us to get into in one Instagram live around the word disability, right? Because many people embrace using the word disability because it describes the fact that society is not set up for them to succeed, right? It's not, I'm not broken. It's that our structure doesn't provide the accommodation or the accessibility for enough people, right? That's sort of tangential, so I won't get too deep into it.
No, but where I was beautifully,
right, yeah. You. But where I was going with this is this idea of like, we're conditioned, if we're not in enough neurodiversity affirming spaces, to look at all of this from this deficits based lens, right? And what is the opposite of being strengths based? Being deficits based, right? So there's a group of people who's actually, they're moving away from referring to ADHD by that name, and they actually call it VAST, which stands for variable attention stimulus trait, right? And the idea that it is a genetic predisposition or a trait that causes the way our attention focuses to vary from somebody who doesn't have this trait, right? And that it's not so much like a disorder as it is a difference. If you're curious about that, if you're listening, you're curious about that, look up the work of Edward Hallowell. He talks about that really eloquently. So one of the things we can do when we're struggling and we have this fear around like maybe this parenting picture, it's not going to look like what I pictured in my head, is take a deep breath and ask ourselves, how much of this is subjective, is some other person's opinion of like, well, this is what the expectation should be. So if your child doesn't match this expectation, then they have a deficit or a disorder. And is that what you feel, right? Yeah. Because the other piece of this is that, and you touched on this a second ago, the number of times in a day, in a week, in a school year, that a child with neurodivergence hears that they are not living up to expectations is devastating, right? And so in our homes, the more we can create a neurodiversity affirming space in our homes, the more we can help balance this repeated messaging, you're failing to meet my expectations, you're failing to meet my expectations. That's number one at home, right? And that's why so many families of neurodivergent kids homeschool, right?
That's what I was
number two,
going to say. Like, I think that if your child's self-esteem and confidence is being like bombarded and you know that a regular brick and mortar school, a traditional school is not neurodivergent affirming and who potentially even uses a 504 and IEP and the four little letters ADHD to your child's advantage, if they're using it against him, then maybe look for other options. That's a way of advocating. Not even maybe, like for sure look for other options. But I think also to that, part of the work I do is helping parents be uncomfortable. Like they're going to be uncomfortable, right? Because then, okay, oh my God, like if I have to homeschool, like what does that mean? Right? Like I work like 9 to 5 and I can't do that. Like school for me is like a must. So it's like, you have to come to terms with what you have. And if your goal is to help your children thrive, then what do you need to do to make that happen? Okay, it's not homeschooling, but what else is there? Because this is what this school can give you.
Right. So number one, I don't want to get too into the weeds on homeschooling, but number one, I will say there are ways to homeschool, even if you work full time, even if you're a single parent, you have a partner, your partner works full time. There are ways to do that. Reach out to me separately. I'm happy to talk more about that.
Okay.
But I will, to your other point, right. So if our child is in a brick and mortar school, we can create a neurodiversity affirming space in our homes, number one, to help balance that out, like we just talked about. Number two, we can advocate within the school for change, right?
Okay.
Nobody gets into elementary education unless they want to help children, right? They don't do it for the money. They don't do it for the glamour, right? So those educators, they want your child to thrive. That I really encourage everybody to see themselves as being on a team with your child's teachers and the leadership at your child's school, right? But what happens is maybe they don't have the resources to bring in the PD, the professional development on best practices, evidence-based practices. And so maybe that's a teacher who went to school 20 years ago when things were different, and their school doesn't have the resources to bring in that professional development, right? Or maybe it's that, you know, individual educators at your child's school really are on the same page with you about this, but there's somebody in leadership who hasn't had that conversation yet, right? There are ways that we can go in from a positive, let's be a team, right? The challenge, you and I, let's imagine you're my child's teacher, right? You and I are on a team, and the challenge that we need to meet is helping my child thrive, right? If we're not fighting each other, we don't have to use those resources like I'm on opposite sides from you. If I don't have to use those resources to fight you, then we all both get to use all our resources to meet the challenge, helping my child thrive.
Yeah.
Right? Which, by the way, is the same lesson I teach my boys when they fight. They were fighting over something the other day, and I was like, hey, you guys are so focused on fighting each other over this thing that you don't have any resources left to solve the problem. What if we stop fighting with each other and use all that energy to solve this problem? Can anybody come up with a solution? And in like 90 seconds, they had a solution, right?
Save that up, wrap that up, and save that up, because so many moms, you know, need that little script. They have like sibling rivalry and stuff. No, but you mentioned like so many points. Like there are many realities, you know, depending on the state, depending on the funding that you get. I don't know about you, like in New York, but here in Florida, the turnover of teachers is like insane. Even in the same school year, in schools that are like AAA schools and have all of the funding. So it's like the never-ending cycle of like, I have the funding, but my good teachers, you know, that are capable and willing and wanting to do all these things are leaving. And then, you know, we want to do it, but we don't have the budget. And you know what, my assistant just left, and now I'm left with like 25 children on my own. There's like so many realities that also our teachers are living with that. But I'm thinking, even get with the school board, get with the PTA and say, okay, you can't afford it, let's do some fundraising, and all of the parents are going to pay Caitlin to bring her to school and do a PD, you know, something like that. Like that's where what I mean with get uncomfortable, keep pushing, get out of your comfort zone, get creative, don't stay stuck. And it is uncomfortable to make these calls and to maybe, you know, invest like 3 hours to do a fundraising, but you're doing it with a purpose.
You're absolutely doing it with a purpose, and you can start small. You know, if it feels too big to go to the school leadership or to go to the school board or anything like that, if your PTA is open to bringing in speakers, you can bring in somebody like me to speak just to the parents through the PTA. That's a start, because the more informed the parent body is, the more voices you're going to have behind you in your advocacy with the school, right? So that you don't feel like you're alone being the only one who does it. Yeah, I mean, one step, right? What is one step we can take today that gets us closer to the goal for the week? And how does that get us closer to the goal for the month and for the year, right? I'm a big believer, and that's an executive functioning thing. Speaking of neurodiversity, how do we take something that feels big and overwhelming and break it down into increments, actionable steps, so we feel like we can take the first step?
So that it's actually like doable and not like this impossible thing. If you feel like it's impossible, no wonder you don't even want to, you know, start doing it. One of the things, and that really changed my mind after becoming a parent in this whole education world, and how brick and mortar schools here in the US are like so behind in being neurodivergent inclusive, was a book that I read. I don't know if you read it, The Importance of Being Little.
I've not read
Did you read it? And I even started like Googling like schools in New Zealand and Sweden that have like neurodivergent inclusive classrooms, and everyone's learning together and like laying down on rugs and without shoes. And like, I was like, what is this? We expect everyone to sit, you know, for 8 hours a day on a desk in a why are we staying so stuck in old school ways?
Yeah, so reason we're staying so stuck, there are a couple of reasons. One is when you define these things as deficits and disorders, right? And you have that deficits-based lens, then you can get tricked into defining goals based on conformity, right? So what's best, what my goal is that the 25 or 30 or 35 kids in front of me are all conforming to the same standard, right? They're all doing the same thing. They're all sitting at that desk with their feet flat on the floor, right? And their quiet hands and their eyes on me, right? When we begin to explore a neurodiversity affirming environment, what we discover is it's actually really beneficial for everybody. The neurodivergent kids, the neurotypical kids, the teachers, right? Talk to me about classroom management. How much easier classroom management gets when you build a neurodiversity affirming environment, because we move away from this idea that I should be managing behavior to the idea that I should be understanding behavior, right? So I'm going to give you a really specific example that came up with a student of mine earlier this school year, because sometimes parents will bring me into conversations with the teachers if the school is not doing professional development around neurodiversity. You have like a parent-teacher conference and I participate. Okay. So let's imagine this. A child puts his head down on the desk in the middle of lessons, and the teachers feel, why should he not be held accountable, right? Where is his responsibility in this? He knows better. His head should not be down on the desk. So I'm going to discipline the behavior of the head being down on the desk, right? This is a wonderful teacher, right? This is just somebody who doesn't have training in this, right? So I say to that, the head down on the desk is a signal. He knows he's not supposed to have his head down on the desk, right? So there's not really a whole lot of value to disciplining that. He already knows he's not supposed to do it. It's a signal that he's missing some skills he needs to meet whatever your expectation was in that moment, right? Well, if I try to understand, that's a signal. What is it telling me? What is underneath that? What does he need, right? I can teach skills, right? Especially if I'm a teacher and I'm in a classroom, right? So we talk about this when people want to say, oh, well, he's just not motivated. Well, I can't teach be motivated, but I can teach skills, right? So why is his head down on the desk? What is the skill he's missing? I teach that skill. You know what happens? The head down on the desk behavior goes away, and I didn't have to discipline it, right? If I discipline head down on the desk, I haven't taught the skill. It's just going to happen over again, right?
Yeah.
So it benefits everybody, right? So, you know, I'm happy to talk IEPs and 504s and all that stuff, but I'm way bigger picture with this, because it's not just about kids who have IEPs and 504s, right? These practices benefit everybody in that room, you know, including the teachers.
Now, the reality is that for now, until we do the deeper work that we hopefully are doing, especially, you know, you with your mission, and I hope there's more people like you out there, like trying to really break the barrier. But the reality is that for now, some of the kids really that can thrive if they have those traditional 504s and IEPs, right? For now, right? And for now, having the diagnosis allows them to receive the accommodations that will help them thrive.
Yes, so, and that's the value of the diagnosis, right? Is that the way that the system is set up, certain diagnoses come with certain understanding, accommodations, it's other services and things like that, 100%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's where I was going. Like, even though we have to do the intentional work to start going away from the deficit and the disorder, and I agree, that's why, unfortunately, you know, if you want to use like insurance and all of that, you need the diagnosis, and it's kind of like you have to learn it to use it to your advantage, not see it as an actual deficit and I'm less than, because that's what I hear. I'm less than, I'm not capable. And it's kind of like, no, let's learn the best ways for you to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if you are participating in the system and you need that to work the system to get what your child needs, absolutely. There's no, but I would never tell you not to do that. And I work with so many families who have IEPs or 504s or accommodation plans. Yeah. One of the things that I'm able to help them do is go into those meetings, the IEP meetings, from a position of confidence. Again, that idea, right? Trusting their instincts, understanding that they really know their child best, because those meetings can be intimidating, right?
They are intimidating. I've sat on those meetings as well, as requested by parents. And oh my God, they get questioned, they get hammered. Why did you miss X amounts of day? And how am I supposed to give your child an IEP if he's coming late every day? And all of those questions that make you feel like a horrible parent. And it's kind of like, why do you even want to go through that? All towards the end to tell you, like 2 weeks later, 3 days later, like, yes, we're going to give you the accommodations. But like parents call me like after, like crying, you know, and it's kind of like, it's okay. That's also how I support them. You're on the right path. Let's keep going. Let's keep working. Remember, like before, when I used to be inside the school, I would collaborate with the teachers. The teachers would come to me and all of those things. I'm no longer inside of school, right? But I still help the parent in like, these are the next steps that you should take. Like, don't take no for an answer, you know?
Absolutely. And the other thing about that is we can help parents understand how to write IEP goals that are neurodiversity affirming, right? So if I have a child who focuses best when he is not making eye contact with the teacher, which is true for many children, right? I don't want demonstrated eye contact as a goal in any of his school plans, right? That just doesn't make sense. So, you know, helping parents understand those nuances and understand their rights and what they can speak up about and advocate for is a huge part of what I do.
That's what I was going to say. As we start wrapping things up, like let's say someone joined from my community or even yours, but it's just learning to get to know you and what you do. Like, what do you do? Everything? Or do you also have like people who, you know, that advocate with the same, you know, intention that you do? Like, is your consulting firm just you or also other trained professionals?
I'm laughing only because I'm thinking just like any mom, I feel like, yes, I do everything.
I do everything. Yes, it's only me.
Yes, to answer your question, there are several ways to work with me. So I have a private tutoring practice called Joyfully Learning. You can find that on Instagram at Joyfully Learning. So if you're looking for tutoring or executive functioning support for your child, that is the place to find us. And I have a team of amazing educators who we can definitely help you out, or you can find us on our website, joyfullylearning.com. When it comes to working with me personally, I'm working with families one-on-one. I come speak to parents groups, as we talked about. I do professional development in schools. I'm presenting at conferences on a variety of topics. How to create a neurodiversity affirming learning environment is a big one people want to hear about. I also talk about giftedness and how to best support our gifted learners. We talk about evidence-based practices around homework, speaking of things that a lot of schools are not actually following the research on. So you're welcome to reach out to me either through the website, joyfullylearning.com, or via DM here on Instagram. If you're interested in working with me one-on-one, I'm always happy to hear from people.
I want to bring you to my kids' school for the neurodivergent inclusivity for sure. But with that being said, I mean, do you also do these like virtually? Do you travel? Do you do virtual learning and tutoring?
Yeah, so I can meet with parents and work with parents via Zoom. You know, I work with parents nationwide and even some families internationally now. And in terms of working with schools, I do travel if the school wants to bring me in, or we can do it virtually, a virtual professional development or a virtual speaking engagement for a parents group. I do love being in person, so if it's possible to travel, I will do that. And if you follow me here on Instagram, you'll find out if I'm appearing like at a conference or a summit or something like that. If you don't feel like your next step is to organize something specifically for your group, but you'd like to come to something that somebody else has organized, that's where I'll be announcing those things as they come. So like just last week, I was at the University of Connecticut's conference, and I have another one coming up in a few weeks. So people can stay tuned for that also.
Thank you for challenging us in relearning even how we think and how we say things, because even myself, like, yes, I could be a trained professional and all you want, but in a way I still, as a human being, have to change the way of, you know, if I want to help my children and their kids like live in a world that is ADHD free, I also myself have to start referring to it in a very different way, right? Because does that make sense what I'm trying to say? It's kind of
I think what you want to be free of, are the biases and the ableisms,
exactly.
Right? It's not that you want to be free of the type of processing that comes with the label ADHD, but you want to be free of those biases and the ableism that causes our children to feel less than, that causes them to feel like they're failing to meet expectations, because it's invented. Somebody said this is that expectation, you know?
Exactly. At the same time, let's put ADHD, somewhere else. Let's say dyslexia or sensory processing, like all the different things that are a different way that your brain processes information and gets out information, all of those things that I know that you teach. Again, it's more like, of course, I'm afraid of getting a diagnosis if I think this is a deficit. So it starts with understanding and getting educated myself as a parent. That's also how I advocate. It's like in reading, in making the time, in reframing my own way of thinking, so that finally we can live in a neuro inclusive, world with all of the strength-based stuff that we talked about. So thank you, because I think for me, it's also, again, as a human being, it's like, no, there are different ways. And in creating these conversations, we are finally saying there is a different way.
And I think if you're a parent who is unfamiliar with neurodivergence and your child has a neurodivergence diagnosis, one of the best things you can do is start to surround yourself with voices of young adults and adults who share that way of processing information. So if your child has received an autism diagnosis, listen, surround yourself by voices of young adults and adults who are autistic, because they're going to show you what it means to be affirming, right? What it means to be inclusive and accepting, right? And move you away from that fear-based space to what it really is, what this really is, to live this life,
Like what it means.
The absolutely best thing you can do is to surround yourself by people who are neurodiversity affirming. If you do one thing coming out of this, that's what I want you to do.
Okay. Is there like a book or someone or any, like a good place to start if you're just wanting to learn about neurodiversity and what it means and start to break that barrier? Is there like something that you would recommend?
Yeah, so I would say follow me on Instagram for sure, and following other accounts where you're hearing neurodivergent voices. There are some great ones. Anybody who wants to send me a DM, I'm happy to send you my like top 5 list. But yeah,
please send it over. Yes,
yeah.
I want to see it, because again, myself as a human being, it's like I can want all of these things, but I have to work inside to start thinking other ways, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want a couple just to start with, I would look at Neuro Wild. She is a neurodivergent speech language pathologist, I believe. I would also look at the OT Butterfly, Laura Pettix, who's an OT, does a lot around neurodiversity affirming spaces. And I definitely have other ones. So just anybody wants to send me a message, I will send you some others. Social media, for all of its pros and cons, one of the great things that it does provide us is the ability to surround ourselves with those neurodiversity affirming voices if we seek those accounts out. And maybe that's your first step. If it feels intimidating to do it in your in-person community, you start there and then move to finding that in your in-person community. But it's going to make all the difference in the world.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for all of the knowledge that you shared. I think this is going to be so valuable, absolutely, because even if you don't have, which I want to say everyone in your family, there's always someone who's neurodivergent. Like there's always, okay? So like, but with that being said, even if you think you don't have, even if you still haven't been faced, with like, yes, hello, hi, I'm neurodivergent, and that's okay, that's beautiful. Like, listening to this live is a way of even understanding and creating a neurodiverse world, because you're gonna be like, you know what? Yeah. Like, it's okay.
We're building community here today. Anybody who was here and joined us or who watches this recording later, DM me, come find me. This is how you start to build community. This being here today is one step.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for your time. I really value it. I won't take any more of your time, and this is going to stay uploaded, and you can, when that's uploaded, I'll tag you and you can share with, with your world as well. Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a great conversation.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch soon. Bye.
Bye.